Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning, leading into your lunch hour. My name is Brianna Jones, and I am the Assistant Director here at the Leadership Institute. And thank you again for joining us and spending the last portion of your morning with us. We really want this time to be interactive and engaging, so we will be using the Q&A feature throughout. I will pause our speaker throughout this entire webinar to moderate any messages that come in. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Jason Somerville. Jason is a member of Organizational Development Team at Outreach. Outreach is a startup tech company leading the industry as a sales execution platform. Jason has spent most of his professional career working in startup tech companies, to include Carvana, Yelp, Cameo, and plenty of more, focusing on curating stable organizational structures to support hypergrowth and inclusive leadership. Jason believes that leadership is not solely about what you do, but how you do it. And he will explain more about his leadership philosophy in our time together. So please help me welcome Jason in the Q&A chat. As I said again, I will pause us throughout to give my reflection as the moderator, as well as monitor the chat. So for now, I will turn it over to you, Jason, and welcome. You're muted, Jason.
There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I got you now.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that warm introduction, and hello everyone from near and far. My name's Jason Somerville, and it's a pleasure to be hanging out with you all for the next 60 minutes. What I'm most excited about for this next 60 minutes is really talking about something that we all experience. Whether we've experienced it most recently, maybe it's something that we've experienced quite some time ago, but that transition from being a buddy to being a boss. And I like the term buddy to boss because it's a little catchy, but you can change that up from being a peer to being a manager, being a buddy to being a leader, however you want to frame it. But for the purpose of today, we're going to just call it buddy to boss. It has a little ring to it. And what I'm most infatuated about when it comes down to this topic is when we first transition from being an individual contributor to being a manager, it's that moment of, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. I can't wait to lead a team. I know it's going to be easy. I've seen people do it. I'm going to walk in and I'm going to kill it. And you're absolutely right. The hope is that that is the reality. But I personally experienced something a little bit different. When I first started, I came in very confident, ready to put out any fire, ready to be the face of the team, knowing I was the smartest on the team. But I realized, well, that's not really important when you're a manager, when you're a people leader. It's important when you're an individual contributor, being the smartest, sometimes being the most outgoing, having the best ideas. But when you're a people leader, when you're transitioning from being an individual contributor to being a leader, well, now it's about developing others, shifting the mindset, bringing in your leadership expertise to unravel the talent of the people on your team. And so today we're not going to dive into how to do it. We're going to more so dive into the mindset of what we should be thinking through as we're transitioning from a buddy to a boss. And for the variety of us on the call, if you're already saying, hey, I'm already in a leadership role, I've been in a leadership role for quite some time, well, this is going to be empowering to you, for you to be able to reflect on the people that are around you and say, how can I look at this buddy over here, this individual contributor, and help develop them into making them a leader? Or better yet, I just transitioned to being a leader like last week. So I am fresh off the press. I'm so new and I want to learn all I can. Well, this is also going to be beneficial for you as well. So I want to dive in. We're going to have some time to reflect. Most importantly, shift our mindset to how to transition from being that buddy to being that boss. So with that being said, let's dive in. So there's 3 components of this journey of leadership that I like to highlight. The first one is managing self. And that's the part that many of us, before going to a leadership role, we experience. And that's the, I get the job done. I work hard, I make sure I work with the right people, and I get the job done right, and I get it right as often as possible. And then we transition to the second level of this leadership journey, which is managing others. And now it's not about me getting the job done. It's about me developing others to get the job done. And then from there, as we continue along our leadership journey, we then go into managing the business. And that's where we say, I influence processes and policies to support how we get the job done. So for the purpose of today, you probably have already guessed, we're going to focus in on managing others. I develop others to get the job done. And that is that sweet spot of when we're transitioning from I get the job done as an individual contributor to managing others. So let's reflect for a moment. I want you to think to yourself, what is your biggest challenge when transitioning to managing others? And feel free to throw that into the Q&A space. What's your biggest challenge? Maybe it's delegating, especially to someone that used to be your peer that now reports to you. Or maybe it's identifying the employee skill gaps. Like, I'm not really sure why this employee isn't doing well. I'm having a hard time kind of figuring out how to get to them. Or maybe it's giving honest feedback, especially to an underperformer that, well, used to be my happy hour buddy. So as you reflect on that, I want to share some studies that were conducted from the Society of Human Resource Management in 2021, also known as SHRM. And it talks about the struggle that most people managers have within the first 6 to 15 months of their journey. The first one is 47% struggle with developing a leader mindset. Transitioning from the I get it done to the mindset of I'm developing others to get it done. The second is 61% identify with I struggle with identifying the skill gaps. I have 10 people reporting to me, and in the reality, I don't really know who's strong at what and who has areas of opportunities where. I'm having a struggle with that. And then the highest rated was 76% managing and developing reports. Basically saying, hey, I'm in a leadership role. I know how to do all the tasks that I'm asking everybody else to do, but I'm having a hard time developing the people and sharing the vision and keeping everybody aligned to the same North Star. Well, I have a simple framework that we're going to dive into. And it's going to help shift our mindset of where we're spending our time. Are we spending our time trying to tell people what to do every second of the day? Are we spending our time trying to micromanage? Are we spending our time thinking through how to be an effective people manager, especially as we're oftentimes managing people that might have been peers before, that might have a stronger resume than we do, might have been in the industry a lot longer than we have, so they're maybe a little bit more knowledgeable. How do we manage and develop those types of people?
And Jason, before you dive in, I would like to pose a question to you. Why do you think that managing and developing reports is the hardest part of the transition? I know that you touched based on it a little bit. It could be that that person has more experience or that used to be your happy hour buddy, but explain a little bit more why 76% of us, that's the hardest part of the transition.
Yeah, most definitely. So I'll highlight a couple of different additional facts before diving into that. So out of that percentage of 76%, the age range for those that were in the leadership position that rated this at 76% was between the ages of 26 and 33. Meaning that for the most part, they had maybe 7 to 10 years of experience under their belt as a subject matter expert or as an individual contributor. And now the task and the job that you're expected to do as a leader is vastly different. No one really cares what you can do anymore. And that's oftentimes throws people off when they go into the leadership role. You don't know that I can code the heck out of this website. You don't know that I'm the best facilitator. Well, as a manager, no, I don't know. I don't really care either. Because what I really care about is the fact that you now have 10 people that report to you. And I'm expecting for you to lead with vision, lead with guidance to drive a bigger change. And I think what the challenge that oftentimes comes into play where it makes this transition challenging is it's no longer about you anymore. It's about your direct reports. And I think of, and I put it in layman terms, it's about, as someone like myself, I don't have any children at this time. And so life is all about me. I play pickleball, I go to the gym, I travel. But as soon as I have someone, an offspring, or I'm a guardian over someone, at that point now, my life kind of has come to a halt because I'm responsible for the development of someone else. And that transition can be challenging when you're so focused on the I, which is often the case in the individual contributor role.
I think you brought up a valid point. Leaders, before we become leaders, we are individual contributors. So we take pride and joy in that individual contribution. And, it's a big transition when you now have to think about developing those other people, helping them to find what their individual contribution could be, and what their strengths are. So thank you for that, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question too. And I'm excited to dive into that a little bit more, honestly, because I think that's a perfect segue into, well, what is this framework that can help us manage and develop our reports more effectively, knowing that that's the biggest gap that many leaders experience as they transition? Well, I have a little trick for you here. We're going to dive into this effective manager framework. And I'm a big advocate of keeping things simple, because once we apply them into the workforce, they'll get much more complex. So I want to keep it simple here, and then as you apply it and look into your workforce, look into your teams, look into your career trajectory, you can then kind of massage it to make it make sense in your space. So let's explore what makes an effective manager when transitioning from buddy to boss. And the truth be told, this is an effective manager's framework that's across the board, but I want to tailor it to the audience and to the topic today of from buddy to boss. So the first component is effective managers are managers who listen. The second component is effective managers are managers who take action. Now, how this graph highlights it is it's not either or, you need both. And let me tell you why. Managers who only listen or who over-index in the listening component, they usually have very, very strong close connections with their direct reports. They have high level of psychological safety on their team because people feel like they can speak up, because people know that, hey, you're a leader that listens. But what happens when all you do is listen? Well, you can fall victim to absorbing knowledge as a leader, but since you're not acting upon it and driving the change, well, sometimes you can find yourself losing credibility. You can find accountability starting to decrease on your team. Because we're brainstorming, but there's no actions. I'm telling you what I want to see. I'm your direct report. I'm saying, hey, these are things I want to see, and you're telling me as a leader, yep, I hear you, I understand, but there's no action. So now as a leader, I'm kind of like starting to see you not as credible, or I don't feel as you're being held accountable for the things that I'm sharing with you. And the reality is this happens oftentimes when you're transitioning from being a peer to leading a team of people that used to be your peer. Well, you have a soft ear. You want to listen. You want to be bought in. You want to still be liked. We're human, right? We want to be liked. We want to have a sense of belonging. And so sometimes we over-index in the listening, and that can have repercussions long term. And then managers who take action. Well, what happens when we only take action? What happens when we don't listen and we only take action? Well, we can come across as, I do what I think is right without your input, because I'm in charge. I work to get to this manager role. I know the ins and outs. I can do your job better than you. So I'm just going to take action, and you're going to like it. This approach can reduce engagement and create a space where employees feel as if they're worker bees and not true value adders. And I think it's safe to say, at some point along your career, maybe you're saying, oh, this is me. Or maybe you're saying, oh, I remember a leader that I had when I was going through my career trajectory that took that approach. And we all know what gets us most excited is when someone listens to us, takes what we said, and then adds value by driving change where they see fit. And so when we talk about this, the question is, managers who listen, what does that look like? Managers who take action, well, what does that look like? Well, let's break it down in even simpler forms. A manager who listens is someone who solicits feedback. That's one of the biggest gaps of new leaders. They do not solicit feedback, and I fell victim to this myself. I just assumed what they were thinking. I mean, I was in your shoes before. I don't need to ask you how you feel. I know you're annoyed with this process. I was annoyed too. But creating that space to ask and solicit that feedback is how we listen as leaders. And then how we take action. Well, that correlates to providing coaching for your employees. Taking what they said, hey, I'm struggling with this. Hey, I don't understand this. Hey, this doesn't feel right. I understand. Thank you for sharing that with me. Now, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to coach you and guide you to the next performance level, to get you to the next tax level that we want you at. So that's what we're going to dive into. We're going to spend the majority of our time talking about managers who listen, providing some tips and tricks on how to solicit that feedback and ways to think about it. And then we're also going to dive into managers who take action, and that's providing that coaching component. So
Jason, what I gather from what you just shared in this slide about effective management, are you saying that managerial action is more important than just simply listening to your direct report?
Yeah, no, great call out. And I'm glad to provide some clarity around that. So I am saying they are both equally important. Only way you can act on what your employees are experiencing is if you listen. And so the goal here is to say, hey, I'm listening so I can act appropriately, so I can navigate appropriately. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that goes back to that earlier part. When we say managing others, it's about I develop others. And in order to develop someone, you have to know what their areas of opportunity are. And sometimes listening is not just only with your ears, sometimes with your eyes, it's through observation as well. That's definitely another layer down, but I think we're on to something where we're saying, hey, we're listening with what we hear. We're listening with all of our senses.
Oh, I like that, Jason.
Yeah.
That's good.
Good question.
Because yes, listening, it also goes to what you're observing and kind of what you're seeing. And you're seeing these things because you're not just focused on yourself. You're not just focused on how I can get that next promotion, how I can be the get to the next level of leadership. You're actually kind of pouring into and observing the people who you're leading. Yep. So that was a great point. I appreciate that. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, I love that question. So let's dive in a bit deeper, and let's spend some time, about 10 minutes, talking about soliciting feedback. And so just to level set, to ensure that we're all on the same page, soliciting feedback is about providing a space for employees to share concerns and to share wins, allowing opinions to be heard and considered. That's what that's all about. And so as a leader, when we think of soliciting feedback, this is when we would say, you talk to me. And what I mean by that is, this is a time as a leader where I am not throwing in my insight, defending what you're sharing. I am sitting back with two listening ears, listening to what you're saying as you talk to me and I listen. And so before I even dive into some tips and tricks there, I want to take a moment and just ask, and just allow us to reflect in our own spaces. How often do you solicit feedback from your employees? Is it daily? Is it weekly, monthly, quarterly? Or, hey, this is a safe space. Maybe it's, you know what, Jason? I actually never solicit feedback, and that's okay too.
As we wait for some people to put some of their experience in the chat, I will speak from my personal experience. I try to solicit feedback from any direct report. And when I say direct reports, I think of the front of the house, so our admins, our receptionists, and I try to talk to them at least on a once a month basis, just to make sure that I am providing them with all of the resources that they need. And I hope I didn't put my foot in my mouth, Jason. I really hope once a month is as frequent enough to make sure that you're developing that direct report and that you're listening. And I think that a month allows you, gives you enough time to listen and to act on what you're listening to.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you shared that. And I'm actually going to piggyback off of that, because the reality is there's so many different researchers and frameworks that say how frequently you should do it. And honestly, I align with many different ones. But what I would say, and not to jump too far ahead, but I want to highlight this because you brought up such a great point. The reality is it may vary. per employee. You have some high performers that are oftentimes, if you want to like dive into more of like the personality assessments, they're more of your dominant style. When they have an opinion, oh, trust, they're going to share. So maybe I solicit from them once every 2 weeks or once a month because I know they're comfortable coming to me and sharing it. But then I might have someone on my team that might be new to the workforce, or someone on my team that might say, I'm a little bit more shy. I don't like confrontation. So they might not provide much feedback. So maybe I'm going to chat with them maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on that cadence and their performance level. So I do think it's a muscle that we have to flex. And that goes back to that listening component, listening with your ears, listening with your observation, and being able to see some gaps sometimes and say, hey, Brianna, I know you've been a little bit more disengaged than usual. Just wanted to check in and see if there's any feedback you might have for me so I can support you. And so it's all about really flexing that muscle. But I will say I am a strong believer that there's no one size fits all approach for the frequency in which you solicit feedback.
Thank you, Jason. And I did have a message that comes in the chat. So before you move forward, I would love to read that to you to get your thoughts. So Brian says that overdoing it when it comes to our strengths as a leader can often be a vice. How do leaders continue to stay in their wheelhouse strength-wise, but remain inclusive communicators as leaders?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks for whoever proposed that. As you're asking that question, I'm hearing a few things. I'm hearing one thing, how do we look at consistency with our leadership style? I'm also hearing, how do I continue to develop myself as a leader? The reality is, as a leader, how I am on day one as a leader should not be the same as I am on day 2, day 30, year 4, year 5, and it's an evolving muscle. Something that comes to mind when I think of inclusive communication, when I think of how do I continue to work that muscle with a variety of teams, and most importantly, how do I do it in this remote/hybrid environment? This is going to be a topic that we're not going to dive into today, but I want to highlight it because you brought up something really important. It's 2 things that come to mind. One, it's energy management. It's being able to manage and be aware of the energy that you're putting out and the energy you're receiving from your team so you can effectively listen, you can effectively coach. I think the second component that goes there is when we think of inclusive communication, we think of working that leadership muscle. The reality is that leadership doesn't get easier. We just get stronger. So regardless of the position you're in, let's just say we're in a team lead managerial role. The team that you're going to manage is going to get more complex. The projects are going to get more complex. The challenges that are going to be thrown your way are going to continue to get amplified. That's why oftentimes you make more money, you get more responsibility, and you continue to move up that trajectory. The reality is we have to continue to work our muscles, our leadership development muscles, through programming like such as the one we're in now, to really understand, hey, this is something I'm experiencing. How do I resolve it? And something that I would highlight, just to piggyback, and I just shared this with the consultant that I was working with, is the power of coaching and development for us as leaders. And so I think that's something that's powerful. So I think of a great example would be, hey, I struggle with inclusive communication, not because I'm not inclusive, but it's a learning curve for me. It's not my strong suit, so I'm working towards that, and that's okay. Awareness is the first step. Then the second step is the coaching component. And the second step is to say, hey, I am a leader, but in order for me to be the best leader, I do have to close this gap. So let me connect with Brianna to get some executive coaching with their department. Or let me connect with A, B, C, and D to sharpen that skill set. Because what happens, and not to harp on this too long, but what happens is when we don't manage our energy effectively, when we don't manage our own internal development effectively, that experience trickles down to our team and has long-term effects. So I know that was a loaded answer, but I hope that provided a little bit of clarity on kind of where my mindset goes based on the question that was asked.
Thank you so much, Jason. And I would love to elaborate, but I know we're a person for time, so I will let you have it.
No worries. Awesome. But I love the questions. Keep them coming. So let's talk about soliciting feedback a little bit. So I want to go through 4 things that are helpful. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I want to just get your mindset thinking of things that you should be doing as you're thinking through soliciting feedback. The first thing that we're all clear on is that we should be soliciting feedback. The frequency may vary, but I would say if you are truly new to management, to a management space, and you're transitioning from buddy to boss, I would say doing it bi-weekly is very, very healthy. And don't think it has to be done in this formal, like, hey, I'm putting time on your calendar for soliciting feedback. Sometimes it's a a chat in the coffee room. Sometimes it's during your frequent one-on-one. Sometimes it's 10 minutes after the meeting, just saying, hey, what were your thoughts? And so what I want to highlight here is the first step of is having a specific question. What oftentimes happens as new leaders is we go into a space where we're very vague. A couple reasons why I think we're vague. One, it doesn't cross our mind to be more detailed. But two, sometimes we're a little intimidated by the feedback that we might get. Having a specific question allows you to ask and create a space for your employee to provide meaningful feedback. What do I mean by that? In yesterday's team meeting, did you find a new format efficient and engaging? Based on your most recent project, how would you describe your performance? That helps me out as an individual contributor. That helps me answer that question so much better than if you said, hey, how do you think our meetings are going? I'm like, well, I guess they're going good, boss. I guess. Or you say, how was your overall performance? You think you're kicking? You think you're killing it, or what? How you doing? And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm killing it. Versus saying, hey, based on that last project, how do you feel that your performance was? What you're doing is you're creating a space that provides an even playing field and it doesn't overwhelm the employee, especially if you're my friend. Me and Brianna, we're friends. I report to her, but we're friends. And now she comes to me and she says something like, how is my leadership? Well, it's good. What you mean? It's real good. Versus saying, hey, how do you think I performed in that meeting yesterday? Was it impactful for you? Well, actually, Brianna, it was impactful, but it was kind of long. I don't know, it kind of didn't keep me as engaged as I would like to be. So the first step is having a specific question or questions when you're going into soliciting feedback. The second is embrace the discomfort. So this is a big one. As a leader, you're in charge. And after you ask for feedback, sometimes we have a hard time to stop talking and embrace the discomfort. People will feel uncomfortable about answering your question and giving you feedback at times, and that's okay. Don't let them off the hook. Don't try to massage and make them feel better. I want you, every time this happens and you have that awkward moment, count to 10. Commit to counting to 10 seconds and allow that employee to speak first. And I guarantee you, almost always, the employee will break the silence if it's silent long enough. What oftentimes happens is, as leaders, we sometimes decide to ramble on a little bit because we're uncomfortable. Especially when you know there's some opportunity for growth as you as a leader, which is the case for all of us. And so what I mean by that is I'm in a one-on-one and I say, hey, John, what are your thoughts on the meeting that we just had? I'd love to know your true and transparent thoughts. And John's kind of like, and before John can even continue processing the question, you jump in and you say, well, I mean, I don't think it was that good. I think it had room for opportunity, but I mean, we're going to continue to get better as a team, but what are your thoughts? And so what you're doing is you're not embracing the discomfort. Allow the silence to sink in. Allow the employee to digest what you're saying. And then if the employee doesn't have any immediate feedback, it's not your time to throw in your opinion. That's your time to say, well, I see you're still thinking about it, and that's okay. So let's do this. In our next one-on-one this week or next week, I want us to circle back to that question on how you think we can improve our meeting efficiency and how you think I can improve as your leader when it comes down to our meetings. Now you have given them a homework assignment that allows them to think about it. You've embraced the discomfort. And most importantly, what I love about this is you are now creating a culture around soliciting feedback. You're now saying, hey, this is going to be a part of who we are as a team. So if you didn't feel comfortable giving feedback this time, no worries, it's a new muscle. Go home, do some homework, and I expect to see you next week with some type of answer. And so now you're creating a culture. You're looking at the big picture versus just in the moment. So that's number two. The third one that I want to share, which is my favorite, is listen with the intent to understand, not respond. So don't interrupt or argue when someone's giving you feedback. Just listen. Focus on understanding what the person is telling you and try to learn something from it. When they finish speaking, check for understanding. You can say something like, so I hear what you're saying is, or repeat back to them the challenge that they've raised. Ask for understanding. Do I have this right? Am I aligned? Are we saying the same thing? What that does is, one, that opens a space for more transparency. Two, it shows that you genuinely care. And most importantly, what we talked about earlier, is it shows that you're listening. I will say, we want to avoid anytime we're soliciting feedback and we're seeking to understand, I would say shy away from the, can you give me some examples? Naturally, that's going to put people in the defense space because it feels like a cross-examination. It's almost like saying, I told you I felt like the meeting wasn't impactful because Brianna, it wasn't engaging. And now you're telling me to give you examples. Next, I'm trying to keep my opinion to myself because now I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole and I would like to get promoted next year, buddy. And so it's that component of, especially when you're dealing with a friend, when you're dealing with someone that was once your peer, you want to make sure that they never feel defensive, especially as you're adopting this soliciting feedback culture into your team. So avoid being defensive, but make sure you're just understanding. And another important component here is you don't have to give a solution. Someone providing feedback is not for you to solutionize. Hey, the meeting wasn't engaging. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do as your leader is I'm going to make sure we have interactivity next time. Like, yeah, okay, great, thanks. But more so, I just want to be heard. And the last one is reward criticism to get more of it. So when someone provides feedback to you, treat it like a treasure gift. Prove to them that it's been received, that you really appreciate those thoughts. Even if you don't agree or align with it, that's okay. Your goal is to create a culture where we can be transparent, where we can collaborate with efficacy. And so first, thank them sincerely. I'm going to say be radically candid, Second, if you agree with the criticism, make it visible. Say, hey, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And there are some components about that I agree with. So I'm excited to, as your leader, to think on a little bit more and circle back with the team on how we can drive change. I didn't commit to anything, but I made sure you knew that it's on my list. And when you disagree, that's okay. Hey, I'm not sure if I totally align with that thought, but I do think that there is some value in what you're saying in the sense that it wasn't as engaging as it could have been. So I want to put us all to the test as a team to figure out, what do we want out of our meetings? Me personally, I'm the leader. I thought it was really engaging. But again, my goal is to develop other people, not to be about me. And so the goal here, as you're thinking through this space, as you're transitioning from buddy to boss, is to, hey, I know we might have gone off to happy hour. I know I might have been at your wedding. Shoot, I might have been in your wedding. But in this space, I don't want you to feel punished. I want you to feel that what you're saying is well received. And if I agree or disagree, that's irrelevant because your opinions matter on this team. And they for always will. So thank you for sharing. Those are the 4 for soliciting feedback when it comes down to how can we listen? Try adapting those 4. And the reality is, I'm going to say, don't go in for the kill. Don't try to adapt all 4 tomorrow. Pick one. Commit to one saying, you know what, I'm going to embrace discomfort. I know I've had some moments in my one-on-ones where I jump in and I just overshadow. I want to allow it to be awkward. I'm going to put my hands in my pocket and ball them up because I hate awkward moments, but I'm going to embrace it because I know the value that it adds to the conversation.
And I think you brought up a valid point when you talked about embracing the awkward, embracing the discomfort. Here at the Leadership Institute, we kind of thrive off of that as facilitators. We sit in the moment. We pose a question to the group, and hands don't fly up when we want to. So we sit there and we wait for people to process. And I think that's the one thing that some of us extroverts or some people who have that lively personality, we tend to forget that some people are just natural processors. It's not that they don't have the answer. They're just thinking it through. And I think that a lot of times as leaders, you just want to give them the answer. So I think that embracing the discomfort, embracing the awkward, that is just spot on with kind of one of the leadership tools that you should have in your toolbox. Because as the leader, if you speak first, everyone's going to be like little minions. Yeah, good idea, boss, good idea. And you won't get that true collaborative culture that you're looking for. So that's a great point, Jason. I love that you brought that up.
Absolutely, yes. So as we're thinking through this, we checked off our box of soliciting feedback. We're listeners now. So I think we can all say, for all of us who are that are tuned in, that we are listeners. We understand some tips and tricks on how to listen, how to solicit feedback. Now we're going to dive over to that other component, which is managers who take action, providing that coaching. And I want to be totally transparent here. Someone that does a lot of coaching, coaching is a meaty topic. And many of you all probably know this on the call as well. Coaching's a meaty topic. And so what I want to do is, it's not about how we coach and what your coaching looks like and the framework that you leverage. What I want to do is I want to take a moment and level set on what coaching is. And then I also want to just talk about the mindset that we want to have when we're embedding coaching into our team, into our one-on-ones, into the reality as we're transitioning into a leader of potentially our peers. So why is it important to use coaching skills if you want to be an effective manager? Well, what coaching does is coaching helps us uncover blind spots. It helps us strengthen performance skills of our employees, and it helps us change the behavior that can directly impact business results. As I said before, when we talked about feedback and soliciting, it was the employee talks to you, you listen. And I said, I talk to you. But now, when we think of coaching, it's we talk to each other. This is truly a conversation. This is truly a back and forth collaborative space that we're in. I want to pose this just thought out there. Have you ever been in a space where you're like, hey, I want to coach this person, but it's so hard because like they don't take it seriously because we're friends, or they, you know, they're average performers, so they just are just happy to be here and collect the check. Or maybe they believe they're more knowledgeable than me because maybe they've been doing, you know, engineering for 10, 15 years and I've been doing it for 8, but I'm the leader. And so, I mean, coaching's okay, but it's really hard to talk to each other because they're maybe talking down, or maybe they feel like they are over you and skill set wise. And so you find yourself saying to yourself, oh, this can be draining sometimes. Or you find yourself saying, hey, I don't really know if I know how to actually really coach someone. I mean, I've seen it, I heard it, you know, I read a few articles on LinkedIn during my downtime, but I don't really know if I know how to coach someone. What I want to highlight is some basic things to support either scenario. But the most important thing that's going to drive your leadership effectiveness is when you think of coaching as we talk to each other. This allows you to support transparency, this allows you to get buy-in, and this allows for richer alignment to your North Star that you and the employee that you are coaching are going towards. So the first thing I want to highlight, these are 4 items that I want to highlight as we talk through this, is in order to coach, we have to have a goal. And when we think of a goal, it's our North Star. It's what we're aiming for. I've seen time and time again with leaders that are transitioning into leadership, especially coming from peers, that they say, well, I'm coaching them, I'm helping them out, I'm developing them, but you're developing them on one thing and the employee is focused on something totally different. And there's no alignment. So it's really impossible for you to get to that North Star when you are on 2 different trajectories. So something that I would consider when it comes down to setting goals is understanding when it comes down to career goals, asking what is your long-term goal? And I always like to preference that long-term goal can change. A lot of times we have that component where, you know, what's your long-term goal? Okay, you want to be this? Great, we're going to work towards it. But 6 months later, I got more exposure. I got a mentor. I worked on this project and realized, actually, I don't want to be a project manager. I'd rather be a product manager. So having those career development combos, what is your long-term goal? Very simple question. And as we talked about before, embrace that awkward silence, allow them to think about it. If they don't have an answer, come back with me next time and we'll talk about it and we'll build this out together. And the second component is the performance goals. How do you plan to hit quota? Those are oftentimes a lot easier, and a lot of times newer leaders, they go straight for performance goals. How do you plan to hit quota? How do you ensure that you're going to be performing at this level? Easier oftentimes because they're metric driven, but it's still a question that's worth proposing because when you think about coaching, you have to have the common goal. If the goal is to sell 50% year over year, well, employee, are we aligned to this goal? Yes, we are. Let's go get it. Or employee says, well, boss, I'm not aligned to that goal. That's not realistic. Well, if that's the case, now we have a conversation so we can build alignment. The second component here, after we set a goal, is to seek to explore, not to solve. Jumping too soon to give advice to solutions is the most common mistake, and I'm going to be transparent here. It's not just new leaders, it's just leaders across the board. Remember, when you're coaching, you are in a different role than when you're being the boss. When you're being the leader in charge, I'm informing you on what you need to do. But when I'm coaching you, I'm developing you. Most direct reports who are talking about their professional development and talking about their professional development and wanting to continue to grow their career set, they're not really looking for you to give them a solution. They're looking for you to give them guidance, give them clarity, give them confirmation, give them self-efficacy along their journey. And so some questions that I oftentimes ask that are not questions that I came up with on my own, they are certified questions that come from the Coaching Institute is, how do you feel about that? What have you already tried? How did that work out for you? So use an example. I'm going to set the goal, and the goal is going to be, I want to take on 3 additional projects this year because I want to continue to grow my skill set. I have more bandwidth and I want to stretch myself. What a great goal. I'm the leader. I say great goal. Now I want to explore more. What type of projects? What gets you going? What keeps you motivated? What gets you engaged? What doesn't get you engaged? I'm not saying you won't be assigned things that don't get you engaged, but I want to be aware of that. How do you feel about this project? How do you feel about working with this new department? What have you already tried? Have you already reached out and got a mentor? What have you already done? And what you've already done, how did it work? Did it work? Did it not work? So we can make sure we are going in the same direction. But my goal is to learn from you, to explore, to have a conversation, but not to solve. And the moment you find yourself, and we all do it, when we're in a coaching space and we find ourselves solving, that's when we want to backpedal a little bit. So keep that in mind. We want to set a goal and partner in that space. We want to explore and not solve. In a coaching space, the employee is solving, not you as the leader. You're guiding, you're mentoring, you're coaching. The third thing that I want to highlight, so we set a goal, we're thinking to explore, not to solve. And then we're challenging assumptions. This is where oftentimes newer leaders struggle, not because they don't want to challenge assumptions, but when I am challenging an assumption on someone that's more tenured than I am, I'm challenging an assumption on someone that, well, they trained me when I came onto the company and now I'm leading them. Or like I said before, I'm challenging an assumption on someone that is a little intimidating. You know, I'm more of an introvert, they're an extrovert, so our styles clash a little bit. So I'm a little nervous to challenge. That is where you as a leader, you have to say, hey, this is an area I'm not that comfortable in, but I want to go get development. Because in order to be a successful and effective manager, you have to be able to coach. In order to effectively coach, you have to be able to challenge assumptions. When we think of challenge assumptions, it's not about being devil's advocate, it's about understanding. So I'll give you an example. Not too long ago, I was working in a one-on-one space at my journey at Yelp, and I had an employee that was very strong, but a devil's advocate. And don't get me wrong, you always want a devil advocate on your team because you want someone to say, well, what about this? What about that? But sometimes that same mentality can minimize their potential. And as a coach, my goal is for you to reach your potential. So the employee says, well, I couldn't do this. And my question is, well, why not? The employee says, everyone knows. Who is everyone? Of course, X and X is true. Says who? I know this and that already. Is that a fact or is that an assumption? So what I'm doing is, and I'm not discrediting my employee, but what I'm doing is I'm going a little bit deeper. I'm challenging the surface. I couldn't do this. A newer manager's response, and we've all fallen victim to this, is, oh yeah, I can definitely understand why. It's pretty tough. No, why can't you do it? Or it goes back to everyone knows that everyone's stretched thin because all these projects, it's too many projects on our plate. Everyone knows this. Okay, who is everyone? Because I didn't know. So the goal here is to listen, to be able to challenge for assumptions to better effectively coach. And the last tip that I want to call out there is ask, don't tell. Now this one's a little bit finicky, and the reason I'm going to say it's finicky is because we all come from different industries. And a lot of times we'll say, you know, in certain industries, it's a little bit more, hey, I'm the leader, I tell you what to do, period. And if you're in that working space, I'm not going to give you insight on how to navigate that because, again, all of our working industries are a little bit different. I can speak on the tech space and I can speak on the research from coaching. And the research from coaching shows that In order to effectively drive change, drive behavior, gain buy-in, and have someone reach their maximum potential, you want to start off with asking. So as a manager, I'm going to ask, not tell. Now, again, if it gets to the point where I need to tell, I will. But that's not going to be my go-to. So what that might look like is, may you work with John to help him with this project as he's needing some support? My assumption is you're going to say yes. If you say no, I check in. Why don't you want to work with John? Because I don't like the way he works. And what part of his style don't you like? Well, every time I work with him, he belittles me. I definitely understand that. Well, I want to pull you all together because as a team, we have to work together. And I'm going to coach him through that situation because he's going to work on that project. Do you see how I did that? So I put him in the driver's seat still, even though my vision is still going to have to come to life because you're going to have to work on this project. And so it's asking first and then telling when needed. What I would say when it comes to coaching, avoid jumping to telling what someone's going to do because you lose buy-in, you lose engagement. Ask first. Ask first. So those are the 4 tips that I have when it comes down to coaching, especially as you're transitioning from a buddy to boss. And so the 2 things we dived into: managers who listen, they solicit feedback. Managers who take action, they provide coaching. Managers who do both are effective leaders. So with that being said, you're probably like, whoa, okay, I got the majority of it, got a couple things that resonated with me, that's fine. All of that doesn't have to stick with you. The goal is if 1 or 2 things stick with you, that's essential. What I want to do to wrap it all together here is I want to highlight something that is near and dear to my heart, and it dives into energy management. And we're not going to deep dive into that, that's a whole different framework, but it's very relative to new leaders. And it talks about intensity versus consistency. What do I mean by that? I'm a manager who listens. I solicit feedback. Am I just really intense? Am I like soliciting feedback the first 3 months, like just nonstop, and then I never hear from my employees ever again for the next 2 years? Or am I consistent? Am I taking the Brianna approach? Once a month, every month, I'm carving out this time. When I'm coaching, am I like, oh my goodness, I see potential, I'm gonna coach you so well and you're gonna be the best person, and everyone else, I'm gonna do a little bit, but I gotta focus on this one, I'm really intense on this person, but the rest of y'all I'll get to. That's not sustainable. Intensity is not sustainable, consistency is. And for my visual learners, like myself, let's take a look at this. When we think of intensity, intensity is week 1, we're on big flames. Week 2, flames get a little smaller. Week 3, the flames are like, oh, I forgot about feedback, soliciting feedback, coaching. I'm just drowning. I'm just trying to stay afloat. I didn't overly committed. And then we find out week 4 and week 5, we absolutely don't give feedback. We don't give coaching, and we're just surviving. And our team feels it, and it shows in productivity. Or do we lean into consistency, where we say, you know what? I'm going to be coaching everyone once a month in our one-on-one time, and I'll also be soliciting feedback, and we'll be doing this every other week for the foreseeable future. I encourage you, as a leader, as a new leader, or maybe even as a 10-year leader, regardless of the employee, regardless of your strengths, your areas of opportunity, I encourage you to adapt the listening and the coaching framework, taking action, and be sure that you think consistency, not intensity. Intensity is not scalable, nor is it sustainable. Consistency shows professional maturity, control, and gives your employees a sense of steadiness that's directly correlated with productivity. So with that being said, I want to say thank you. And I'm going to flip it over to the question side, and Brianna, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Jason. That was very, very good and informative. I really appreciate you for ending it with consistency. Well, intensity versus consistency. I think as first-time managers, yes, we want to get in and solicit as much feedback as we can because we just think that's naturally the right thing to do and the right way to lead. So I really appreciate you for painting the picture visually for us who need to see the difference between being intense and being consistent. And consistency definitely leads to a more stable environment environment. And I think you have a part in creating that psychological safety for everyone because you're stable. Everybody kind of knows what to expect when it comes to their development. Not necessarily the workplace, because we all know that changes every day and tasks change. But as far as their development goes, they know when to expect to have that one-on-one time, and it definitely creates that sense of belonging. So yes, thank you for that. I do have a few questions that I would like to ask Jason. So we talked a lot about being a peer, and being, a wedding guest, and now you're having to solicit feedback from them that next Monday morning. So tell me, when you have personal relationships with peers or with people who once were your peers, how can you use that to your advantage, or should you even use that existing relationship to your advantage?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that we didn't discuss, but that's the reality. It's like, well, since I do have these relationships and now I am a leader, isn't there something I can do to maximize, to drive greater productivity, to drive more empathy, to drive more connectivity? You're absolutely right. There's so much you can do in that space. And I would say leverage those. But what we have to do as leaders is we have to make sure we put guardrails in place. Some newer leaders, it's a little bit more natural for them. Other new leaders, they struggle in this space. And what I mean by this is guardrails is all about making sure that we have proper boundaries set. And so if I have a strong relationship with an employee that I am now overseeing, and I always hang out, I will let that employee know up front, hey, John, now that I'm overseeing you, I still want us to continue to work harder. I'm going to lean into you a lot because I understand how you think and I understand your skill set. And I'm so glad to have you on my team to be able to lean into you beyond just the day-to-day work responsibilities. But I want to be transparent. As a leader, I'm responsible for the whole team, and I want to make sure that the whole team gets an equitable part of me. So I do want to be mindful that I would love to still hang out if appropriate, but I'm going to pull back a little bit on the happy hours and things like that. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to focus a little bit more on doing more team building events so we can all build this type of relationship together. And all that to say is I'm still your friend. I'm not going to say I can't be your friend, but I do have to have stronger boundaries in place because now I'm responsible for more than just a friendship. I'm responsible for a team. I'm responsible for development. I'm responsible for productivity. So lean into those relationships, but be intentional with the expectations you set and be sure sooner than later, set boundaries and guardrails. That sets proper expectations and that avoids you from being in that awkward situation where you're like, oh, well, he texts me to go grab a drink, but I guess I just won't respond and hopefully he doesn't say anything about it. That icky situation, be upfront, be transparent, and listen to their concerns. If they say, well, that's not fair, we've always been friends, what does work have to do with this? I totally get your perspective. But as a leader now, and reiterate what your responsibility and your main tasks are. So that's my insight there, and that's what's worked for me in the past. Leveraging those relationships, but leveraging them responsibly and strategically.
Yes, thank you for that. I think that's very important, having that transparent conversation at the start of that transition. So we had another question come in, Jason, and it says, if I have been an intensity-focused leader in the past, how do I make that transition to consistency in a practical way? How do I show my peers/employees my new desire to be consistent?
Yeah, that's tricky because what you're doing is you're changing the dynamic of your leadership style to some degree. You're changing the dynamic of the team, and that goes into that change management component, which is fun but daunting. You know, be told I'm not going to sugarcoat it in any way, shape, or form. But what I will say there is, it's all about doing things in bite-sized pieces. The goal is not to go from intensity to consistency overnight. The goal is to figure out, hey, where are my intents that I can have what I call low-hanging fruit, that I can have easy wins with transitioning to consistency. So for example, let's just use one-on-ones. I only have one-on-ones when someone's not performing well. Well, that's very intense. So basically, anytime a calendar event pops up on the calendar with my manager's name on it, something's on fire and something's not good. How could I change that? Well, instead of me just doing it ad hoc when things are on fire, I'm going to schedule a one-on-one bi-weekly, whether things are going well or whether things are on fire. to build that level of consistency with how regularly I connect with my employees. That's just one example, but the goal is not to go from intensity to consistency overnight. Reflect on where are you intense at. Reflect on those individual areas and really get granular there and say, I'm intense when it comes down to the details. I'm intense when it comes down to team promptness. I'm intense when it comes down to meeting scheduling. And then say, okay, out of all these things that I'm intense on, what are some easy wins that I can transition to consistency? Maybe it's one-on-ones. Maybe it's team meetings. Maybe it's giving feedback in a more positive way. Maybe it's transitioning how I communicate with my employees to drive more engagement. Figure out where you're most intense. Take 2 or 3 of those components, draw a line of transition of what it would look like if it was consistent and not intense, and begin working that muscle with those areas. My only challenge, to minimize your stress and to minimize the stress of everyone around you, don't try to come consistent overnight. Pick 1 or 2 things every 2-3 months. And over the course of a year, you realize that your consistency, not only one, is a lot more digestible because it happened over a period of time, but it's also a little more well received because it's not so ad hoc and so randomized. So that's my thoughts there.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you. And as I close, I just want to thank you again for being our facilitator today and taking us through all of the different phases and facets of transitioning from a buddy to now a boss. So we appreciate that. As we wrap up today, just thank you again for tuning in. We will make the recording of this presentation available on our Facebook and YouTube page within 48 hours from today. If you want us to email this information, please go ahead and drop your email addresses in the Q&A feature of this meeting so that I can send a follow-up email with a copy of today's presentation as well as with the survey code. Our next webinar, as we finish this 2022 year strong, is imposter syndrome. So we will be bringing Christina Martin back for that session. That's going to be on October the 27th. On behalf of the Leadership Institute, we thank you so much again for your questions and interest throughout this presentation. And if you're like me and you want to see more of Jason for the 2023 lineup, please send us your feedback. You can email us at leadershipinstitute@columbusState.edu. And if you have any other topics that you want to know more about, new research and leadership development, please let us know as we work on building out our 2023 Disruptive Leadership Series. But thank you again for today, and we will see you all next month. Bye-bye.